Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We're going to give people just a minute to get logged on, and we'll get started shortly. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Just giving people a couple minutes to get in here. Get yourself settled in. Grab your coffee, get a cup of water, and get started soon. For those of you that are here, though, I'm curious. Happy Juneteenth tomorrow. I'm just curious, does anybody have tomorrow off? I can't see you all, but feel free to use the chat. Jamie's raised hand means tomorrow off, I'm guessing. I know that it should become an official holiday. It sounds like tomorrow, but I'm not sure how long that takes to go into effect. 2 raised hands. All right. 3 raised hands. All right. Half day for Philadelphia. I think it's great, and I hope that everybody has a chance to celebrate either tomorrow or over the weekend. Great. Again, we're just giving people a couple minutes to get logged on. Everyone's grabbing their coffee or tea or water, so we'll just give them another minute. Also, to all the dads, happy Father's Day this weekend. I myself have a 2-year-old who likes to wander into my Zoom meetings, so let's hope that you all get a chance to meet her. But it's supposed to be in the 90s this weekend in Chicago anyways. I don't know what your plans are. Feel free to drop those in the chat as well. Go to the beach, go to the swimming pool, sit 2 inches from the fan. I don't know what you're going to do, but I hope you get a chance to enjoy it. All right, we're leveling off here, so I think we're going to get kicked off in just a moment. All right, so welcome, everyone. This is event number 1 in this year's Drinking Water 123 Academy. My name is Justin Keller with the Metropolitan Planning Council, and we've got a great event planned for today. I'm really excited. But first, we've got a little bit of housekeeping. So first, please use the chat box for general conversation and remarks. We'd like to keep the conversation going, so please use that freely. But if you've got a question for the presenters, please use the Q&A button. So that's right next to the chat button. We'll store those and keep those so that they're on deck when we get to the point after the panel, when we're ready to take those. Also, FYI, this meeting is being recorded. We're going to share the link in the follow-up email next week. And we do have a live captioner today. So if you need that, click the CC button in the menu below, or there's going to be a link in the chat. And then we're also going to share the transcript from today. All right. In case you're not familiar with MPC, we're a nonprofit planning and policy organization. We're based in Chicago, and our target geography is primarily northeastern Illinois and the surrounding region. And our goal is to shape a better, bolder, more equitable future for everyone. We do that through our work on water, obviously, and housing, transportation, and other program areas. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, you can do that at metroplanning.org. But since water is what brings us all here today, I'll first give an overview of the Drinking Water 123 initiative. Starting in 2017, MPC released this Drinking Water 123 guide. The guide was aimed primarily at elected officials and municipal staff, and that was based on the assumption that most mayors don't come into office with a background in water resources management. It certainly happens, but we don't think that it's the norm. So to help with that, to educate elected officials and municipal staff, we worked with experts throughout our region to provide an overview of here's the 1, 2, 3. Our region's water sources and the infrastructure required to deliver it, information on drinking water management and the relevant laws, and the third, some of the major issues like supply constraints, contamination, and aging infrastructure. Then, not to leave you hanging, like what should I do with this information? We also included the Do chapter, which tells you what to do with that information. So that includes things like protecting your source, maintaining your infrastructure, financing that maintenance, and engaging with your community. Then, rather than just putting that into the hands of officials and hoping that they implement everything, that you implement everything, we also wanted to follow up with that. So in 2019, we hosted a series of events focused on the best practices from the Drinking Water 123 guide. That was this series right now. We started in 2019, the Drinking Water 123 Academy. And those events were really well attended. If you're a repeat attendee, thanks very much. We're happy to have you. Everyone that's a new attendee, we're happy to have you as well. After the events in 2019, we accepted applications for a technical assistance program, and we did that in 2020. So we partnered with local communities for on-the-ground implementation of some of the best practices from that Drinking Water 123 guide. And now, in 2021, this 2-year cycle repeats of the events and technical assistance and back to events. So starting today, we're back to the events, and we're so glad you're here. We want to actually pause and take a minute to find out who's in the room. And Morgan, can you launch the poll? All right, we've got 4 questions here. First one is kind of a test question. Did you drink a glass of water today? Just want to make sure that everyone knows how to use the polling function. Second one, for Illinois residents, do you know where your water comes from? If you selected you're not from Illinois, please use the chat box. We want to know where your water comes from. Also, there's a I don't know, and that is absolutely okay. That's part of why we're hosting this event series. The third one is, which sector do you represent? Again, if we missed you, please use the chat box. And the last one, which county do you live or work in? Dealer's choice there. Live or work, either one is fine. Again, if you need closed captioning, you can click the CC button, or there's a link in the chat, and those are to the same captions. We have a live captioner today. Someone from Indiana, great. From the Delaware River, okay, great. All right, we'll give people just another minute. Most people have participated already. 11 people have not drank a glass of water today. I didn't drink a full glass of water. I had some sips of water. Maybe we're being really specific. Okay, I think we can close the polling. Let's see. Yes, most people drank water today. Did you thank your water operator and thank your municipal staff for helping to provide safe, clean drinking water for you today? For everyone that is a water operator or municipal staff charged with providing safe, clean drinking water, thanks so much for the work that you do. Then for the Illinois residents, not surprisingly, Lake Michigan is the #1 source of drinking water. Actually, for Illinois, the lake is the source of water for 56% of the state's population. So no surprise that that's the winning one there. Government sector is the most represented. That's great. but it looks like we also have consultants and contractors and nonprofits. I mentioned that the Drinking Water 123 guide is geared primarily for municipal staff and elected officials, but we know that consultants and nonprofits are also part of helping them to provide safe, clean, and affordable drinking water. So thanks to you for the work that you do, and you're very welcome here today as well. Most people live or work in Cook, and then the second most winning option is people that are not from Illinois. Okay, very interesting. Okay, thanks for that. We'll keep this party going. And this, again, is event number 1 of this year's Drinking Water 123 Academy. There's 3 events in this series. Each one's going to be on the 3rd Thursday of June, July, and August. Today's event focuses on water affordability. Next up is lead service line replacement. And after that, we're going to talk to you about asset management. But today, water affordability, we have a great speaker lineup. First, we have Representative Lindsay Lapointe here to get us pumped up about the scope of this issue and the need for collective action. Then Professor Beecher will get us all on the same page with some foundational knowledge and data. Next is our main event. Panel discussion will deliver ideas on how to identify water burdened customers and develop assistance programs. Finally, I ran out of water puns, but Paul May will tell you about a new initiative from the Illinois Section American Water Works Association. And of course, we appreciate Christopher Burke Engineering for sponsoring today's event. Thank you. And okay, I'm going to get out of the way now. Just a moment. But it's my pleasure to introduce Representative Lindsay Lapointe. Representative Lapointe is currently serving her first term as state representative of the 19th District on Chicago's Northwest Side. Representative.
All right, thank you so much, Justin. Someone will give me the hand signal if the tech isn't working. Give me a thumbs up if it is.
We see you and we hear you. You're ready to go.
Perfect. Love it. Still got to check, even though we're almost through this. Thank you so much, Justin. I am here to pump us up. Good morning, everyone. I am coming to you from the far northwest side of Chicago in my beloved neighborhood of Jefferson Park. I want to thank everyone for participating in the conversation that the Academy is putting on today, including my fellow speakers and our host, the Metropolitan Planning Council. MPC is an incredible asset to the city of Chicago, Northeastern Illinois, and the whole state of Illinois. So as Justin mentioned, I am State Representative Lindsay Lapointe. I'm of the 19th House District, and I cover an area that includes much of the far northwest side of Chicago, but also some of our suburban areas. It's a little hard for me to talk about water affordability simply because I believe that access to reliable, fresh, clean, and plentiful water is pretty simply just a basic human right. Especially here in Illinois, where we border, as I think everyone knows, one of the largest reservoirs of fresh water in the world. It's sometimes hard for me to understand why our drinking water is so costly to the extent that thousands and thousands of households across the state of Illinois have trouble affording their water bills. I don't think that is right. But that problem extends far beyond Illinois. Water rates are actually rising nationwide. And a report by MPC, co-authored by MPC, last year found that on average, water jumped by more than 37% in 30 major US cities over the last decade. And guess what? Household income has been basically flat during that time. So that creates a situation where our working families are forced to send a larger and larger share of their wages to the local water department to pay for something which I believe is a basic human right. And of course, that ends up meaning that more and more people get behind on their bills and wind up facing water shutoffs that threaten their health and obviously can disrupt their daily lives if you know, households are being threatened by water shutoffs. Creates a lot of anxiety for our households. The impacts of rising water costs are particularly troubling in our communities of color. In 2017, the Chicago Tribune looked at water rates in communities all across the Chicago area. And what they found is that people in our poorest communities are actually paying more for their water than people in our wealthiest communities. The median water bill for people who live in Black majority communities is actually 20% higher than the median in majority white communities. The water rates in Fort Heights here in Illinois, for example, are nearly 6 times higher than the rates in Highland Park. That just, it really does not make a lot of sense. It's here in the Chicagoland area, it's the same water from the same Lake Michigan. So we really need to figure out how we created these inequities and what our local governments need to do to bring basic fairness, just basic fairness to our water systems. In 2019, Illinois made a pretty good start towards figuring out what is going on with our water rate affordability. The General Assembly passed a bill assigning the University of Illinois at Chicago, this is back in 2019, to conduct a study of water rates in every community in Illinois. So the study would look at what are the drivers of increases in water rates, and the study would develop a new definition of water rate affordability in Illinois. And it would also, of course, highlight opportunities for local units of government to cooperate in ways with the ultimate goal of bringing water rates, water costs down. Ultimately, the study would help all of us to better understand why so many people in Illinois are having problems affording their water, and what we need to do to create systems that make water affordable for everyone. In this case, in every corner of Illinois. So, great piece of legislation, love it. Passed the House before I got there. But as sometimes happens in the hiccups of the political process, there was a little bit of a problem, and that is the General Assembly did not appropriate the actual funding for the University of Illinois at Chicago to actually complete the study. So we get back at it. When the Metropolitan Planning Council asked me to sponsor a funding request for this study earlier in 2021, of course, I immediately said yes. To me, it is just an obvious thing that we need good data to create good public policies. And it's probably obvious to a lot of you too, but I think as we know in the political process, sometimes we overlook that basic truth. In the case of water, we need to understand the reasons behind the recent sharp increases in water costs. We also need to figure out a more equitable way to charge for water, because it is just not right to force some families to choose between keeping the water on and paying their light bills or buying groceries, really in every year, but those inequities have become even more acute and intense during the last year and a half that we've had. So that is why I was so pleased to carry this bill, and I fought hard this past session in Springfield to pass House Bill 3852, which actually provided the funding for UIC to complete this vital study and give us the information we need to start solving these problems together. But of course, we have to remember that a well-done, reliable study based on good data is just step one in a much larger process. To make sure that every person in Illinois has access to affordable water, we need to create new strong coalitions that bring together elected officials, housing advocates, consumer groups, community members, and of course, this academy today is part of that next step. We need to figure out ways to update our century-old water infrastructure and develop 21st century delivery systems But we need to make sure we do that without imposing greater burdens on the people that can least afford to pay more. We need to take a machete to entrenched bureaucratic systems that make it difficult or make it even impossible for people to get help when they're facing water shutoffs. We need to design new programs that will bring equity to our water rates by easing the cost burden on those who can least afford to pay. That's a theme here. And of course, we'll need to fight every attempt. This is another theme here. We will need to really be strong in fighting every attempt to implement policies that are based on politics or convenience instead of real data, planning, and what's going to work for everyone across an entire state, whether it be Illinois or Pennsylvania. We're not going to win this fight overnight. It's going to take determination, political leadership, a community effort, and coming again and again, coming together like we're doing today at the Academy. The way I see it, water affordability is a fundamental issue of environmental justice. We have a duty to put our heads together, to take action, to solve this problem, which of course affects everybody, no matter where you are in whatever state you are. I am so pleased to be here today to kick it off, to pump you up, to get back to those water puns. This is going to be a really important and impactful conversation. By participating in this Academy, you are taking an important step and showing your commitment to finding new, creative, innovative solutions that will make water affordable to everyone, perhaps in Illinois, perhaps in Pennsylvania, to everyone in every corner of whatever state you are representing today. So I truly thank the MPC for having me here today. And I look forward to hanging around for a lot of the discussion. So myself, as a state policymaker, can learn more and be ready to make the change that's overdue. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. I certainly feel pumped up. That was great. And you're right, we're all here today because we want to find those solutions that make water affordable for everyone, absolutely. And I'm excited to see in a couple of years the outcome of that UIC study. What's going on with water rates? What are the policies that we can put in place to just help to make sure that water is affordable for everyone? And thanks so much, Representative, for your leadership and your work in getting funding allocated for that. I really like your points that we're not pointing the finger at utilities or municipalities of you're doing this wrong and that's why water is unaffordable for people. This is going to take local policy, state policy, federal policy, funding to support local government, and of course, working with communities, all of us working together to find those innovative solutions. So that was great. Thanks so much for that. And again, thanks for your leadership. All right, next up is Professor Janice Beecher. Professor, you can start screen sharing. I'll read your short bio here. Professor Beecher is the director of the Institute of Public Utilities at Michigan State University. She served in that role since 2002. And as I said before, she's here to get us all on the same page with some foundational knowledge and data. All right, Professor.
Thanks so much. So you can hear me, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I'm just getting the screen ready. Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Morgan, and the whole team at the MPC. I really appreciate the council, and I did back in the days when I actually was a resident of Illinois, and so that's where I learned a lot, or at least early in my career, learned a lot about the field that I work in. So again, my name's Jan. I work at the Institute of Public Utilities. We focus on utility regulation, economic regulation of utilities, so we support the regulatory policy community in that regard. But I also sort of intersect with public health and environmental regulation. And most of my work throughout my career has focused on the water industry and increasingly on the issues we're talking about. I want to thank the representative for just an absolutely phenomenal introduction. And I'm going to pick up on several of the themes that she mentioned. Justin gave me about a day's worth of ideas to cover in 15 minutes. So I'll do the best I can. I've got a lot more in my slides than I can talk about, but I'm glad to be a resource again anytime. So These are the topics we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about expenditure and price trends and the pressures. I'll share my framework as to why I think we're seeing the kinds of pressure on costs and prices that we're seeing. Some trends based on some recent work I've done on funding and financing of infrastructure, share that. Just touch briefly on measuring and defining affordability, some methods for addressing it, policies, programs, pricing options, and rate design innovation. And of course, the trifecta for utilities, whether you're in energy and water, is clean, reliable, and affordable. That's really the standard, and that's the trifecta we're trying to meet. It's very challenging, but I actually think the water sector has some advantages over energy in those regards. So we should be up to the challenge is my positive message, I hope. So I basically have been tracking this for years and years. I download every year an update from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have consumer expenditure and consumer price data. And so on the left there, you sort of see the pie chart of what consumers spend on utilities. Now, of course, these are averages. And for some consumers, for example, they may pay for their water through their rent. So it may not show up here. So it tends to sort of skew the numbers a little bit. But you can see about $854 a year. And again, what we know is these averages really mask a lot of incredible variation. You get some economies if you share a household, and that can be helpful. So in the U.S., we've seen these long trends these are not inflation adjusted. These are trends in what those water and expenditures for other utilities on the left. On the right, though, you can see that as a percentage of total expenditures. Now, this is not total income. This is expenditures. We've actually done a pretty good job in the U.S. keeping expenditures between 6 and 7%, and that compares fairly well internationally. What we've seen in the most recent years is an advantage to households in terms of lower natural gas prices. But of course, we're going to see some pressure on energy prices, especially because as we're entering into a clean energy future, and we're also building infrastructure in that sector too. So it's something to watch for. One of the term I use about when I describe water and other utility rates, though, is that they're regressive. And I think the representative even touched on this as well. At higher income levels, we spend more on utilities. You have larger properties and more stuff. But as a percentage of the household expenditure budget or their income, you see much more pressure on the low income families. And in some cases, it can be much, much higher than even is seen here for that lowest quintile. And we know, I don't go too far into consequences here, but we know that it's tied to homelessness. The struggle with paying utility bills can be tied to homelessness, difficulty maintaining custody of property and even of children. So the consequences are very, very serious of not being able to afford your utility bills, including water. And as was also already touched upon, in many cases, this just goes back to fundamental issues of poverty and income inequality that the country faces, where, again, folks at the higher levels are doing fairly well, and certainly even through the pandemic, and there's been a lot of talk about that lately, where households at the lower income levels have just not seen the same level of growth. And so we've seen that growing disparity. And again, that means that those bills, especially for those fixed costs of maintaining a household, become very, very significant. So you can see here, this is sort of a snapshot of changes in the percentage of our total budget on utilities, and you can actually see that water is taking a bigger share. So it's a little kind of a busy chart. I apologize for that, but at the lower income levels, you see that pressure even more. So you're seeing water impact household budgets in significant ways, as was mentioned. So those are prices. That's all price data, expenditure data. Now I'm going to switch to prices. So there's another chart I've been tracking probably since my Illinois days, where you see the trends in the main the sort of the gray line in the middle is what you hear about all the time is the the inflation index, right? The CPI, and you'll hear those reports come out. You hear about it on the radio all the time. And so they also have CPI. They track the CPI for different expenditure price areas or sector areas of the economy, including utilities. And so what I've done here is sort of shown with electricity, natural gas, and telecommunications services, we've stayed relatively comfortably under the overall rate of inflation. Now, it's going to be something to watch, though, in the next few years. Again, you know, these trends are dynamic. What do you see way exceeding inflation is water and sewer services, also garbage collection, as we've seen more pricing of solid waste services. Now, the CPI for utilities in Chicago actually is not looking too bad, because again, it sort of reflects that overall average. I was able to pull that out real quickly. I'm always a little reluctant to show this. Justin asked about, well, how do utilities compare to other things? Of course, college tuition's the one that we don't like to mention, but it's certainly a big factor as well. And another area, you know, frankly, that we need to address in terms of affordability. So what I did here is I combined that expenditure trend for water with the price data to see what's going on there. And again, so here's that price pressure. And unfortunately, you know, again, you know, that combines with usage. Now, usage is falling. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But the price is going up at a rate that offsets the gains of that efficiency, if that makes sense. In other words, that we're still seeing a lot of pressure. You know, I was kind of hopeful there for a few years that we'd see some relief on expenditures, but it's definitely creeping up the last few years. So you're seeing those household expenditures go up. Now, the other thing I've put on the side here is just an important thing to note, and that is that rates are different by customer class. And since the recession of the 2008 period, across utilities, I've detected more pressure on the residential class than on the commercial and industrial classes. Now, this is a topic for another day. You know, is it economic power? Is it political power? Is it, you know, or is it just simply the economics of the cost of service that's accounting for that differential? But how we allocate costs between the classes, in other words, makes a difference. I'll touch on that briefly later. Hopefully that makes sense. But the point is to watch that price pressure, particularly on residential customers. So you talked about developing a framework to think about what's driving costs. And so I'm happy to share, this is my typology, I guess, to, you know, the way I think about it. What's happening in any particular system could be, you know, unique to that system. But this is just how I organize my thoughts about the pressure on costs and prices. And Justin, I'm counting on you to wave your arms around if I start running too late. But so there's pressure on capital costs. We're trying to replace a lot of aging infrastructure. And keep in mind, it's really, when you think about affordability, it's the combined effect of water, wastewater, and stormwater. It's not just one subsector. Not only that, I mean, I think we need to think more holistically, not only about the water sector, but about water and utilities generally, both in terms of the problem and potential solutions. I think we need to think about all of it. There's some pressure in terms of current valuation practices that are pushing up the value of water assets, especially in the course of acquisitions, and then additional private capital investment that's sometimes taking place, because that capital investment comes at a cost in terms of compensating investors and also paying income taxes and things like that. There's operating cost pressures, labor, energy, chemicals, standards for compliance, legacy costs, like trying to deal with lead service lines and finally get those out of our systems once and for all. And new contamination threats like PFAS and other impronounceable threats. And then resource pressures, depending on where you are. You may have supply constraints. You may have growth in some areas, although again, that's very locational. And then a tricky thing is that we also have this, again, this sort of declining demand issue. So for a lot of water systems, they're spreading those costs over fewer units of sales, and that alone will cause that unit price to increase. So I put up here, I grabbed some data. I like to use American Water because they provide comprehensive data across all of their systems in the country. And you can see that declining per capita or per household, in this case, usage, with an uptick, important to note, in COVID, people were working at home, and so their usage popped up. And keep in mind from my previous slide, you're multiplying that usage by a higher rate. So that is affecting utility finances in some interesting ways. But so anyhow, you've got this declining usage, in some cases population loss, and then structural pressures that I'll hit on a couple times. This pressure to price everything at full cost, to recover the entire cost of service through rates. And also, you know, as part of that, the enterprise model, in other words, the utility has to stand alone and be entirely financially self-sufficient. Now this is again a slide we could probably spend a half an hour on or more, but this is sort of another one of my, you know, just after thinking about these things and working on them for many years, this is my typology for sort of explaining the difference in rates, especially between, you know, public and private, but also larger and smaller systems and so on. These are some of the key drivers. You know, taxes, you know, do they pay taxes and fees? Do they pay returns? Do they have certain costing practices or rate making practices? Do they get contributed capital up front from developers that can help them keep, you know, that keep the rates down or impact the rates? There are very significant locational drivers and scale drivers, how they compensate their employees. Are there transfers in or are subsidies that cross over from the system? And is there any cost avoidance going on? Are there investment incentives? And again, full cost pricing that you'll get particularly under utility economic regulation. That's, you know, especially true on the private side. So I did this paper recently. I'm glad to share links for anybody who's interested on funding and financing infrastructure. And this chart on the left gets used everywhere. Every report uses it to show that the federal support for the water sector has really waned. And that's something that's getting a lot of appropriate attention right now. That's a good thing. And again, in this report, I sort of detected these four major shifts, you know, from a government role in funding to a government role in financing. That's very different. You know, financing has to be paid back. A shift from the federal to the state and local levels, a shift from incorporating tax revenues to going strictly to user fees in many cases. And then the difference between financing with public capital, which tends to be at a lower cost, versus financing with private capital at a higher cost. So a big theme that I'm working on is, again, picking up on what I mentioned before. You've got this regressiveness when you talk about utility rates, the first bar. With a tax instrument, you at least have a possibility of being more progressive or at least less regressive, if that makes sense. So one of the things I'm encouraging is a more, again, you know, a more holistic approach and a hybrid approach that maybe combines elements or instruments of both user fees and taxes to help address equity. So again, this is just a quick survey result from AWWA. Asked their managers, will you be fully able to afford, you know, or support the cost of service? And you can see that going towards the future, a lot of them have been expressing concern about that exact issue. I'm not going to go into the details of these, but I threw these in here just for reference. EPA measures affordability with, you know, with this 2% of median household income, 2% for waste, or 2.5% for water, 2% for wastewater. Now, these are used in standard setting as an overall metric. There's a lot of pushback now on median household income. And while I agree that it does not help you necessarily fully understand the problem or craft solutions, it does say something about the capacity of the community as a whole to help address the issue, you know, because of the distribution of wealth. But you need multiple metrics, I think, is the answer. And so some of the recent criticism, again, has pointed out, if you're a low-income family, 2.5%, 2%, you know, 4.5%, this will really add up to a, you know, or, you know, it doesn't take too long for you to hit that number under current rates. So again, I won't go into this, but AWWA, other groups define affordability in different ways and provide you that information about how to look at that. It's an area that's really developing. It's been a lot of great research. So I put some references in here about that, including, you know, Professor Teodoro's work on alternative metrics, and then some of the pros and cons of some of these alternative metrics too. So how do we address affordability? We basically have three ways to deal with it: policies, programs, and prices. And so I'm going to focus a little bit here on, you know, on pricing, but the rationale for assistance has been laid out pretty well, including sort of the business case. You know, there's a nice paper by Tracy Meehan and Ian Gansler in the AWWA Journal, if you want to take a look at that, about how it can, you know, investing in an affordability program can sort of yield benefits back to the utility and of course the community. And so, but some of the ways we could potentially address that. One of the really good ideas out there is to not necessarily create a water assistance fund, standalone fund, but enhance LIHEAP or create like a sort of a meta support system to help people with their essential, you know, pay for their essential services. And there's some of the, again, the AWWA M1 manual has pointed out some of the advantages and the disadvantages of funding programs at the utility level. So just a couple of more things. You know, here's, you know, different stakeholders in rate making have different expectations. Ratepayers really want that safe, adequate, reliable service and a controllable and affordable bill. I want to emphasize that each step of rate making, setting the revenue requirement, allocating the costs across users and customer groups, and then rate design, all three matter to affordability. We need to have efficient systems. We need to find ways to lower and manage revenue requirements. We need to find ways to allocate costs and possibly allocate some costs through tax structures and then design rates. We want to be really careful about this fixed charge. You know, there's fixed and variable charges. You can address affordability through both. The fixed charge can really put pressure on the customer's bill and they have no control over it. There are things you can do like a Lifeline rate or certain kinds of tiered rates to get that first block more affordable. The economics literature on this really tends to emphasize a little bit more prices being too low. You know, and there's a lot of that talk in the water industry that prices are actually too low. But we've got to remember, if prices are too high, that also has deleterious welfare effects. So we want to pay attention to both prices that are too low or too high, especially depending on their usage. So another framework I use is that water systems actually deliver different products through one set of pipes. They provide fire protection, and that, you know, and so yet we price water in a way that sort of ignores that in some respects, to how much of the infrastructure is designed and managed to put out fires. And then we've got our essential usage around consumption and personal and home hygiene. And then we've got discretionary usage for you know, watering lawns and swimming pools and things like that. Those, we can really start to pay more attention to the pricing implications across those levels of usage. So one of my other recent papers from last year, I you know, want to start a conversation about possibly some new pricing models. This isn't the answer, it's meant to just start a conversation. And my goal here was to push back on this idea that there's only one way to price or there's a right way to price. The model that I envision does more explicitly recognizes the public functionality of water in cost allocation, including fire protection, sanitation, healthier communities. Calibrate a minimum bill based on a property assessment. Now that could be, there could be a formula to adjust that for, you know, property value is also an imperfect measure, but it's actually pretty easy to get that number. And you could calibrate that. Provide an essential usage allowance to people based on a public health standard, because that's price inelastic and it serves our goals of water security and I think fairness. And then design your cost-based rates to get your resource management and efficiency. And if I were czar, I would prohibit disconnection altogether. I don't think it's a healthy policy. I don't think it's actually that effective of a policy. And I think if we put an end to it, and in rare cases used a service limiter instead to at least keep some water coming into the home, that would be a more humane option, and it would focus our attention on finding solutions to the water affordability issue. So it's simply my attempt to throw something out there. So there's the good thing is there's lots of great resources from the council and others on these issues. I have a website where I have a bunch of links. I'll have to check it out, make sure it's reasonably current, but there's lots to help you out there. Here's my last thoughts. Again, water affordability is just an ongoing challenge. If people are struggling, they're probably struggling across the board. We need new frameworks, we need innovation, you know, we need positive energy here. And so I'm hoping all of you will be part of that. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks, Professor. You're right. I asked you to cover the entire world of water affordability, and I gave you a very limited time to do it. But thanks for covering all that information. I think that a lot of people probably got a lot of different things out of it. And I personally want to go back and dig into those slides because there was a lot of great stuff there. People have been putting questions in the Q&A, and please do continue doing that. Keep them coming in. Actually, we're going to hold those questions for now, though, and then bring Professor Beecher back in after the panel discussion. So do keep using the Q&A. We see them coming in, and we're going to address as many of them as we can. All right, but now that we've got a better understanding of the national trends in water affordability, we're ready to dig into what municipalities can do about it. And our panel today, very excited to introduce Cecilia Reyes from the Chicago Tribune. Cecilia.
Hi, thanks, Justin. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to help have this conversation with our three great panelists. I'm an investigative reporter with the Chicago Tribune, and I worked on the 2017 article that the representative was talking about earlier. So I just want to give a brief introduction to who we're going to be hearing from today, but we will have their full bios linked in the chat for people who are interested. We're going to be talking to Athena Gore, who is a project manager, where she helps communities and cities plan and implement climate and energy planning projects at scale. We're going to talk to Susan Crosby, who's a Deputy Revenue Commissioner in charge of Philadelphia's Water Revenue Bureau, which is responsible for the daily generation and collection of water bills for the city of Philadelphia. And we're going to be talking to Zach Green, who's a senior consultant, where he focuses on utility planning, cost of service, and rate studies, affordability research, and a lot more. So one of the things that I wanted to start this panel on, and I was hoping, Athena, you could talk about this, is some concrete examples of what you've seen the impact of water debt and the threat of water shutoffs has been on low-income households.
Sure, thank you, Cecilia. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
I think I lost my connection. Can you hear me clearly,
yes.
Cecilia? Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I would like to start by just unpacking this term, low income, just a little bit. So we often use that term because, you know, we are in a society where we sort of center around commodification. And I just want to clarify that, in essence, water is free. It is the relationship to the infrastructure that brings about a lot of the issues that we see in low-income communities. And of course, that's not just with water. But, you know, we have to deal with this historical experience and relationship of BIPOC communities to commodification, and think about how we are sort of looking at people who see themselves as water stewards or people who are caregivers for natural resources, and they're assimilating into a culture of, you know, conquer, compete, and commodify. So that's how we end up in this situation. I just want to be very clear about that. So what we're seeing are the effects of that in communities not just in the Chicago region, but across the state and across the country. So when we talk about water debt, we're talking about the change in relationship that people are experiencing because of the infrastructure, because of the income difference, because of not having access to certain rights and privileges that may be afforded to others, not having that income and economic opportunity gap closing. So the water debt is really the main problem because it starts to roll over in these communities and it just continues to compound and compound. And again, seeing things like liens on homes, threats to having their children taken away, threats to hygiene and personal health, which is devastating during a time of COVID. So those are the real impacts and those are the real stories that we're hearing from people in what I would like to call under-resourced communities as they're dealing with this relationship change to a resource.
Yeah, and I know you worked with Chicago and Evanston around this topic of water affordability. Can you just quickly touch on specifically what you were able to help them with, or generally?
Sure, yes. We were able to work with the city of Chicago and the city of Evanston to do a water affordability study in Chicago and a water rate design study for the city of Evanston. And in both communities, we looked at the usage, the rate of water burden, and the affordability. We used census tracts to sort of map out where those issues are pervasive. And that was the quantitative side. On the qualitative side, we also conducted interviews and focus groups with affected communities to make sure that we are ground truthing the data that we were able to collect. So that's just a brief snapshot of what we did. And we are producing reports that are right now internal to those cities. So more to come on that in the future.
Great, and I do want to circle back to you on that community outreach and who is all involved when you want to tackle this problem. But I also wanted to ask you, Zach, if you could talk a little bit about customer assistance programs, how they relate to water affordability, what are the options more generally that municipalities or utilities can consider when they're tackling this problem?
Sure, thanks, Cecilia. And everyone who's spoken, I think, is doing a really good job approaching this from many perspectives. One thing we talked about as a panel and preparing for this is distinguishing between addressing affordability in terms of rates and other forms of assistance that, it could be one-time financial assistance or mechanisms that aren't inherent in the baseline rate or other programmatic features. So I'm just going to talk through a few examples of each. I'll start with the rate structures. So I think we're going to maybe talk a little bit later about programs like the TAP program in Philadelphia, which is an example of income-based rates, which kind of aligns with the way EPA has historically measured affordability, which is a bill as a percentage of income. Other ways to address it are aspects like family size. So sometimes you might have a multifamily rate that's different than your single family property rate. That could be something in the range of 70% of the single family rate, for example, with the understanding that those homes may be smaller. Other examples that Jan mentioned, Lifeline rates and inclining block rates. I don't think we have time to sort of get in the mechanics of how those all work, but essentially different amounts of water usage have different rates. You could have fixed charges that vary by meter size. So that the fixed portion is scaled based on how big the property is and how much water capacity that fixed charge is covering capital costs for. And you could have differential rates by class, where you might have one class of commercial customers subsidizing a residential class, or vice versa. Some communities have said that we want to make sure businesses want to come to our communities, and they have lower rates on the commercial side. And then, and we'll talk about sort of why that is and how communities get to these rate structures later in the panel. So those are some rate structure examples. Assistance programs can take the form of, discounts to those fixed or volumetric rates, but not that aren't necessarily inherently built into the rate. Could be a one-time discount or a fixed amount across a year. And those could be through sort of vouchers, credits, rebates, grants, one-time payment assistance. Could have debt or arrearage forgiveness. We're seeing this new federal program, LIWAP, being developed that's going to be modeled on LIHEAP to help with some of the debt that's been accumulated during COVID. Fee maximums, if you have late payment fees, those could be frozen at a certain point. You can have payment plans that give customers time to catch up without accruing additional debt. The billing frequency is another element. Some people find it's much easier to pay monthly bills than quarterly bills because they're smaller. Shut off moratoria is something almost every community did during COVID, and some communities are holding on to those longer than others. Low flow fixture discount programs, so incentives to help people conserve. Conservation education programs are even a form of customer assistance, and Jan mentioned flow restriction devices. I know of one community where the utility manager was really skeptical about these flow restriction devices, but as an alternative to shutting people off, she actually had one put on her own home to say, can I take a shower? Can I maintain sanitation with these devices? And felt it was a more humane alternative. So that is another tool in the toolkit of utility.
Yeah, that is definitely a lot more than I thought you were going to be able to come up with. Yeah, so there's a lot available out there. And you did specifically mention Philly's Tiered Assistance Program, TAP. Susan, could you explain how that works?
Sure. Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you to the Metropolitan Planning Council for inviting me here today. So TAP, because we also love water puns, is a percentage of income rate, like Zach mentioned, but it's based on the household, and it gives our customers who are 150% of the federal poverty level and below, and those experiencing a special hardship, a personalized individual rate based on their household income. In addition, it has a component of principal and penalty forgiveness that helps erase generational debt that Athena had mentioned.
Great. I think I want to move to, ask all of you what you see the first step being for a community that wants to address affordability, maybe through assistance programs, maybe through undertaking actual rate studies. What do you all see as the first things that they should be looking at?
I think you first need to look at your population. Here in Philadelphia, we are unfortunately, one of the largest, poorest cities in the nation. And so we have a large portion of our customers are low income. And so we knew that we had to develop a program that assisted as many customers as possible. In addition, we also have a program component that helps senior citizens. So I think one of the most important things is really looking at your constituency and developing a program that can best assist them.
I would definitely agree with what Susan just said. Like, not only taking a look, but also being with and being in community with your constituency as well. The stakeholder engagement process is critical to any type of policy and legislation development, and also looking at how you can assist people, not only to have them cyclically involved in an assistance program, but for that program to work, to move them off of it, which should be the point. It shouldn't be a permanent thing. So I think that really sitting with, going to and understanding the community that you're trying to affect, seeing firsthand what's happening with the water infrastructure in their homes, with their water bills, paying attention, being kind, being human is the first step.
Yeah, and since we're kind of on this topic already, Susan or Athena, who was in the room when you were having those conversations in Philadelphia or Chicago, Evanston?
Right. So when our program was first developed, it was it initiated from a bill that our city council introduced and passed in 2015. We didn't actually launch until July of 2017. And through those 2 years, we engaged in a robust stakeholder outreach. We worked with city council, their constituent services. We partnered with our local legal aid society, Community Legal Services, who has a utility unit. So we were able to access their clients. We also worked with our community partners who provide grants and services to our customers. And we also held public hearings to reach out, as Athena was saying, to really understand what our customers needed. We also involved several consultants, such as Raftelis, to help us develop the best program we could, because it's the first program of its kind, and we wanted to make sure that it not only met the needs of the customers, but it met the needs of the utility as well.
Any other thoughts on who was in the room?
For Elevate, we were calling as consultants to each of the cities that we worked with. So I can say that we spoke one-on-one to residents that were dealing with issues of water affordability. We also spoke to some who were dealing with just water infrastructure issues, leaks, plumbing deficiencies, and we are actually running a pilot program that continues to address those things for residents in partnership with the city of Chicago. But the city of Chicago has also taken its own initiative to engage with water advocates on a regular basis. So there is some engagement of community at this point. For the city of Evanston, they're a pretty tight-knit community. They've always had pretty good engagement, and they have several commissions as well. And they have a really great public-facing program for their metering alerts, or their leak alert program, excuse me. So there are some great relationships already in place in the city of Evanston, and Chicago is continuing to build as the issues are unfolding.
Got it. And Zach, I was hoping you could talk about what type of information you work with municipalities to either develop or go into and make sure that they have on hand if they want to tackle something like a rate design study.
Sure. I think Morgan might have a couple slides that she was going to pop up for this. I know Professor Jan Beecher already covered some of this, but what you see in front of you is sort of the way we think of a rate study if it's done sort of comprehensively, if utility sort of needs all the pieces and wants to get through that affordability aspect as well. So the key ones to focus on are really 3, 4, and 5 in terms of just getting through the data. So you want to develop a financial plan that forecasts your revenue requirement. You then have to allocate your costs to customers and calculate the existing rate just to baseline it. And then you get into this analysis of sort of rate alternatives. And what permeates all of these tasks that you don't quite see is a utility or a community, a city, municipality has to have a conversation about what their pricing objectives are. So is their #1 priority access? Is it, affordability? Is it water conservation? Is it revenue stability? So there are all these things which can sometimes be competing that an organization might want to look at when they're trying to get through developing a new rate structure or addressing affordability. For the affordability piece, there's a lot of stakeholder engagement, as we've been talking about. You need to baseline your community relative to peers locally and nationally, understand the customer experience, and then figure out the best levers that you have to address affordability. In some communities, unfortunately, there are laws that prevent the subsidization of some customers by others. And there's a great report, the Pathways report, we refer to it as, by UNC EFC looking at that. What they assessed in Illinois, for example, is that the Commerce Commission, which regulates investor-owned or private utilities, might push back if you tried to say subsidize low-income customers from others to achieve affordability. For most municipal utilities, there's probably more leeway to do that. under home rule in Illinois. An example of the ways that this has been done in other places, there's an agreement between Detroit and the Great Lakes Water Authority that guaranteed that I think 0.5% of revenue would be dedicated to affordability for the next 40 years. So there are ways that communities can codify into their wholesale agreements or rate structures or water laws these programs to sort of formalize them and ensure that the revenue's there for what some people deem human health, right? Because that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about making sure people can afford an essential level of water usage. So, the data needs through all of these are wide ranging. We've talked about census data. You might need GIS data to define your service area, billing data on the number of bills and the consumption units by class. And then obviously all the financials that go into establishing the revenue requirement and allocating those costs, different functions that Jan talked about, such as sort of discretionary versus essential usage. So you can go to the next slide, Morgan. This just gets into a little more of the detail of the cost of service aspect, which is really a very wonky part of this. We're just trying to say, what does it cost to serve a given customer? But that's really just a starting point if you're going towards an affordable rate structure. It's really just kind of calculating the baseline, and then you can make decisions about how those costs should build.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what you said about having a goal in mind at the beginning sounds absolutely key. And I think equally important, as I've heard from municipalities, oftentimes is what they don't want to happen. And so I was wondering, Susan, if you could talk about Philadelphia's bottom line and whether, implementing TAP affected that or how it affected that.
Sure, I think Morgan also has the slide for me. As I said, our program was ramping up in our fiscal year, which begins in July 15 to 17. And we created a low-income unit with 22 people, the fringes, technology. That was about 2.25 million. And the program software and support was about 2 million. When our program launched in fiscal 18, you'll see that it's broken out in expenses and discounts. The expenses are our operational cost, and you'll see that they increase as our program matures. There was a dip in fiscal year 20 and so far through 21. And we believe that that's because fewer people signed up for our assistance during the pandemic, because as was mentioned, we had a moratorium placed on our water shutoffs, and that moratorium is actually still in place and will be in place until April of 22. So we have an extended moratorium. And that's why you see that the discounts are also lower. The discounts are the delta between what would have been charged on their water bill versus their percentage of income bill. That discount we recover through a rider that's reconciled each year from our base rates. And so far each year, the base rates have gone down as a result of that rider, which is positive. And so it's not a cheap program, and it is subsidized by the rest of our customers. However, we've seen that when our TAP customers are in the program, they have a higher bill payment rate than they do when those same customers are outside of the program. So from a collections standpoint, which is I often say I wear two hats. One is an affordability hat and one is my collections officer hat. And so from the collections perspective, we do see that when we give our customers an affordable bill, they are more likely to pay that bill than when they have a bill that is unaffordable. So as far as the bottom line, I don't have the exact numbers as far as the receivables, but we are seeing better payment patterns for our customers who are receiving those affordable bills, which is very promising. And one thing to thing that we always hope is to have more subscription to the program. And so that's one thing that we're going to be really pressing hard on once we come out of the pandemic and come out of our moratorium, is to try to get more and more people signed up for the program, because we know that there are more Philadelphians that are eligible for the program than have signed up.
Yeah, I know that at least in Chicago, the utility bill relief program also kind of rests on that foundation that once you get people affordable or more affordable bills, that they're going to be able to pay them more reliably than they did before. And one thing that is, oh, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, and it also helps budgeting for those customers, because the bill that they receive while they're on tap is the same amount every single month. And so it allows them to better budget for their utility costs within their family budgets.
Yeah, I think it's great that none of you are afraid to say subsidy. We've been saying that a lot in this conversation. And I'm wondering, Susan, Zach, or anybody, if you think that there are baby steps that a community can take if they're not ready to take that plunge of, you know, we're going to ask our wealthier residents or commercial industrial customers to subsidize the bills for people who can't afford them, even partly. Like, what are some things that you can still do if you're trying to get to a goal of affordability?
So one thing that we've had in Philadelphia for quite a long time is a senior citizen discount program that is based on both age and income. And those senior citizens receive a 25% discount on their rate. And we've had that for many years. And so that was our baby step to this affordability program. And even within the affordability program, we've had baby steps. We started out with a forgiveness portion for just the penalty. And just this year, or this fiscal year, in September of 20, we were able to launch a principal forgiveness component. So customers who remain in the program and have 24 full monthly payments receive forgiveness of the entirety of their pre-program arrears. And this is one of those things that really gets to the heart of the generational debt that many of our customers have, as the homes have been passed down from generation to generation. So we've kind of gone baby steps throughout.
And just to add to that, I would say yes. I mean, certainly, you know, I went through a long list of customer assistance and affordability alternatives that communities can explore. And, you know, Raftellus has intervened in communities around the country and around the world at different stages in the maturity of those programs. You know, everything from conservation programs to those low flow fixture incentives to looking at networking with other social organizations and charities, the billing frequency, again, monthly, quarterly payment plans, and then, you know, maybe eventually getting to something like a discount of the fixed charge portion of bill, Lifeline rate, and inclining block. So, you know, some communities know that there's a big chronic problem in their community that they want to address with a big solution, and they feel like they have the flexibility or the funding to be able to implement those, and that's to be applauded. But others do it kind of piecewise as they begin to understand the scale of the problem, what the needs of the community.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Susan.
Sorry, Cecilia.
No, go ahead, please.
One of the programs that Philadelphia has, because we have one of the oldest water infrastructures in the country, is that lead service lines had been mentioned. Whenever the city of Philadelphia goes in to service its own infrastructure, if they find that there are lead service lines within those homes that are in that area, we replace those lead service lines for free. And if a customer discovers that they have a lead service line outside of that situation, we offer 5-year no interest loans to help them get that lead service line replaced. So like Zach mentioned, the affordability rate is just one portion of it. You do have to help the customers with every aspect of their water consumption.
Um, I just thought about this, but one of the challenges that I heard from municipalities when talking about, whether they're trying something new or not, is that oftentimes they can be beholden to the election cycle. So maybe somebody's who really wants to try this rate study or wants to do this thing, but things take time and go beyond that person's time in the city or the town. I'm just wondering, how do you guys, deal with that or try to account for that, or what has that looked like?
I mean, one thing I've found is that, educating up is important for a utility. Make sure you have the data to support the needs, whether it's a revenue requirement, you need a rate increase, or whether it's an affordability program. Sometimes the elected officials, don't necessarily understand the data. On the other hand, sometimes the utility doesn't understand the customer experience in the way that the elected officials might, right? So I think there has to be dialogue. You have to have involvement from engineering, utility management, finance, but also the political realm to make things happen. Because when people sort of understand what the goal is and that it's in the best interest of the community, they're more apt to work together faster.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Luckily, let me rephrase that. In Philadelphia, we have traditionally had a Democrat in office. And because of that, we have a track record of mayors and city council members who are aligned with the ideas of affordability. We also have very strong relationships, not only with our council members, but with their constituent services staff. And we go out into the communities, and recently we've been going to the community's computers to reach out to them and let them know about all of our programs, not just TAP, because we think that it's important to make sure that they're aware of all of our the services that we provide. And whenever we have new electeds come aboard, we actually have meetings and kind of a workshop with them to let them know all about the water department and the Department of Revenue's role in delivering water and the billing and collections and assistance for the constituents.
Yeah, this leads me to one of my last-ish questions. Are there any programs or just any programs, new ideas that you're excited about that you think hold a lot of promise or have been, reliable in getting places where they want to be?
I can definitely say that, at least for Elevate, we are extremely excited about our water reconnection pilot that we're working on in partnership with the city. It's great to be able to go into a home and have good relationships with contractors and work together and talk to the homeowner and try to figure out what the problem really is, because the site infrastructure is really where the owners are having the problems. They may not always see the leak. It may not be in the home. It could be under the grass or what have you. So having a trusted advisor and a trusted expert in the craft there to talk with the homeowner, and also to have that relationship with the city to be able to say, hey, this is what's happening on the ground. How can we start to look at ways to address these other issues that may come up with pinpoint interventions, or how can we scale this into a program? How can we do more with the utility billing relief program is a really unique opportunity. And we're really grateful to have it, mostly, and of course, priority to serve the customers in Chicago.
There are a couple of things in Philadelphia that we think are kind of innovative and that we really enjoy. One is we have water ambassadors. These are block captains and other hyper local representatives, and they sign a pledge with the water department to attend trainings and then disseminate that information into their neighborhoods. So it's like Indina mentioned, using trusted messengers to get all of the information out to our constituents. Another thing we do is we try to involve them, our customers, in things that you really wouldn't traditionally think are water related. In Philadelphia, we have a program, the Mural Arts Program, and the water department has partnered with the Mural Arts program to create water murals throughout our city. And when these murals are created, they're done in conjunction with the community. For instance, we had a recreational center where we covered the walls of the exterior in water murals. We used pictures of the residents in these murals to depict them drinking tap water, conservation efforts, local water sustainability issues. And so we involved them from the design process to the implementation. They came out and helped paint the murals. And so this non-traditional community engagement is something that we found really exciting. And it's just one of those things where we're trying to think outside of the box and get everyone involved, because not everyone thinks that water is as exciting as we do. And so getting the community members involved in any way we can is really something we strive to do.
I'll just add one quick one. The EPA has a division called the Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center, and they will help smaller communities that might struggle with some of the administrative aspects of applying to different forms of funding and financing. They'll even go as far as I understand it to come out to your community, help you fill out applications. So just to address kind of that revenue requirement side of things, if folks are looking for administrative support, federal government has some resources there.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a big one. That's a biggie. Okay, I think we should be moving to Q&A now, and we will have Janice Beecher join us. Thank you so much, Professor. Hi. I'm going to be kind of starting all over the place. Here's one question directed at you, Professor. Your thoughts on creating a Northeast Illinois water district to address disparity in water rates, and how we could do that, or what that would accomplish.
That's a great question. And I don't know anything about the details of any proposals, so I just speak to it generically. But whenever you have a truly regional system where you can, you have a broader base of customers, more diversity of all kinds in that service territory, it does give you some breathing room and maybe some opportunities for some innovation, some cost sharing. I think it's really important to have a governance structure though, so that all voices are heard, and that it's a very inclusive structure in that sense, and then we build some consensus around priorities and values. But I think it's a good idea because I think in some ways, as compared to the wholesale retail model, where you get those complicated cost relationships, if you're under an umbrella, it can be quite useful. And in some ways, it sort of separates some of the politics. I think politics are okay. I think we need good politics, but I think it can also help sort of smooth some of that out.
Any other thoughts on that from our panelists? I don't want to say the word consolidation, but that's kind of what it sounds like sometimes, right, or it can sound to people.
So I've worked on some of these studies around the country, and there's this tension of giving up local control versus this mantra of scale efficiency, right? That if you have more ratepayers paying in, you can share cost burdens. It can have good advantages, especially where you have maybe a downtown system that has older infrastructure and higher cost than some outlying areas that are lower cost. So it's definitely an emerging trend. We have a lot of water utilities throughout America, especially as compared to other countries where things are more centralized. An alternative to formally combining organizations, of course, is collaboration, where you do things like joint contracting to find savings as you invest in the system. So I think it's a great option for communities with regional partners that are willing.
If I could add just one more brief thought, and that just picking up on what Zach said, that the real economies of scale come in three primary areas: source development, treatment, and storage. When you distribute water, there's actually diseconomies. So you want to be careful, you know, you really want to there's really two separate questions here, sort of optimizing on the management of the system, the operations, versus you know, consolidation that doesn't involve that physical proximity. So you want to be really careful. You want to kind of get it right, and to the benefit of customers.
Thank you. So this question is interesting to me because I think it speaks to what Zach was saying earlier about identifying the goals that a community may have before undertaking an assistance program or a rate study. This is about something Antina mentioned at the beginning, this perception that water is free. And this person is asking, you know, whether that's a helpful framework because people may not feel, you know, may feel a certain way about something that they're entitled to. So just want to raise that for everybody and maybe ask if you can go into what type of mindsets you have when thinking about this.
I'm happy to address that directly. The question that you asked me at the beginning was about low-income communities. And I said that water is free, which it is. You can go to a lake, to an ocean, you can get a bucket, and you can pick it up. I wouldn't recommend necessarily drinking it because, you know, you have to filter it and stuff like that. But again, once you start to want to do things with the water, to drink it, to transport it, to use it for your that relationship to the other materials and the type of infrastructure that it takes to have the type of system that we have now has drastically changed the way that especially BIPOC communities relate to natural resources. And I can't speak from another perspective about that because I am a woman of color. But, you know, there's been a lot of talk, especially in the last year, about racial income inequality, about generational debt and the income, the wealth gap and stuff like that. So I think there has to be an acknowledgement that at one point these systems were not here and it was not necessary for them to be here until we had industrialization. So a lot of the conversation that we're having today, rightfully so, because in the present day, we need to talk about consumer prices. We need to talk about affordability. We need to talk about what it takes to keep a system operating in a way that is revenue positive so that we can continue to move forward as a society. We can't go backwards. But we do have to start addressing the fact that cultural axiology dictates our relationship to how we operate in society, and commodification has had an effect broadly on communities, especially when it comes to utilities. I'm sure there are many officials, even everyday people, as ratepayers for any utility, we may have a horror story or two about how we're treated, especially on the customer service side, especially if you are perceived as a person who cannot pay regardless. So I just want to clarify that that was in the context of the question asked, and I wasn't insinuating that water is free in terms of how do governments need to act in order to keep the benefits flowing to their communities.
Makes sense. Thank you.
And one thing that I've heard is there's a growing acknowledgement that water is a basic human right. And so is the burden of the utilities to recognize that and find a way to address that within their communities. I mentioned Philadelphia is a poor city. We're also a majority minority city. And so we have those specific historical problems that Anthena was discussing. And so it's something that when I talk about my collections hat versus my affordability hat, it is something that we struggle with in local government, is balancing the infrastructure and making sure that we are delivering clean, drinkable, healthy water to our communities while also making it affordable. I don't think anyone really has the best answers, but I think that it's a very good thing that many municipalities and governments are recognizing that there needs to be a different frame of thought, frame of reference when thinking about utilities and water specifically.
I think one point that we're sort of dancing around a little bit as well that's important to mention in this context is differential use. It gets more attention out west, but people water their lawns with drinking water. And, you know, that doesn't, it costs money to generate drinking water more than it might to take raw water and water your lawn with it, because it doesn't need to be as high of a quality for different purposes. And so I am, you know, hopeful that over time technologies will come that will allow for things like on-site reuse even. I think that's an important conversation to have when we think about how much it costs to create, you know, potable water versus the different ways that we use water. So just wanted to add that aspect.
You know, the only thing I'd add to that is there's always been a concern though about public health and safety. You know, when you introduce those, and there's an economic side to that too, if you introduce those systems, you have to have assurances that people would be protected, and you would want to make sure that that cost was borne by the users to, you know, avoid adding additional pressure. But I think this whole conversation really raises an important question to me, which is, you know, we've tended in all utilities to move almost exclusively to sort of an economic paradigm. Anthena used the term commodification, right? That's what she's, you know, communicating there. And if you step back and you look at water through a different paradigm, through a public health paradigm, through an environmental justice paradigm, you come up with very different answers. And I'm not saying the economics isn't important, it's very important, but let's broaden our lens and let's look at water through these different perspectives and understand how essential they are. Another point Anthena raised that I've just been recently thinking about more is, you know, water systems are water, wastewater, stormwater, and also ecological water that make a community a nice place to live. And these are all interrelated systems. So the more we can think about water holistically and as part of the community, I think it opens our minds up a little bit more to think about ways to make it more accessible.
I want to ask this question because I think we can maybe answer it from different perspectives. The first one, I'm wondering if, Professor, you have had any experience studying this, but the question is, how do decisions of local governments, specifically allowing or encouraging industrial or residential developments in regions without reliable sources of water, or where provisions of water is extremely costly, contribute to water unaffordability? And I'm interested in whether you have studied that. And Zach, I'm interested in whether you ever, you know, advise a community to take a look and reconsider, you know, who their customers are, given whatever goals they have.
That's a great question. I think a lot of people, and this, I think this goes beyond water, would say, are we really good as a society at making smart decisions early on about zoning and planning and permitting, you know, and why are we, you know, investing in new areas instead of enhancing our existing areas. And I also just want to take this chance to bring up this issue of when is it a subsidy and when is it appropriate cost sharing, or when is it appropriate public investment? You know, these are, we use this word subsidy a lot. And first of all, it presumes some precise knowledge of, you know, who's responsible for what cost or whatever. And we don't have that. It also implies, you know, some normative judgment about who should pay and so on. So I think we need to maybe, again, be a little more circumspect about that. But I think this raises a great question, and maybe Zach has more experience with it on the whole issue of development policy and how we're investing. And I would say it's especially important now because of the dynamics of supply and the demand. We should be optimizing. We should not be compounding our cost issues by making decisions that could end up being uneconomic down the line. I mean, Zach's example of new technologies that might open the door to, you know, to some cost savings, we want to be careful that we're taking full advantage of those opportunities. But Zach, what do you think?
Well, I guess maybe I can clarify what I think maybe people are thinking of, right? I mean, some capital costs of a growing utility might be borne by developers, right? So they could have a connection charge or other forms of capacity charges and things like that. So that if your city's growing and you're putting in new commercial or residential buildings, a developer is going to pay some of that cost, and then some of that's ultimately going to be passed on to the tenants of that property. In another example, you might have a chip manufacturer like we have in upstate New York near where I live that uses a lot of water. And so they need an abundant supply. They may be bringing a lot of jobs. And so there may be this question of whether they should get subsidies because of the economic development potential. Mm-hmm. And then you just have this question of some of these are large developments and demand a lot of water and place stress on your source of supply. And then, you know, Jan mentioned sort of, we need to leave some for Mother Earth too, sort of that environmental element. So, I mean, as consultants, what we do is we help people make sense of the numbers and look at their organization as it exists to help them determine what's next. We don't really necessarily put our thumb on the scale. We want to figure out what the values of that community are. And that doesn't just mean what the people at the utility want. We also want them to engage with the community, and that means the environmental community, a diverse set of customers, as well as the political realm. And we want them to listen and make sure they're meeting the needs of their community and their environment and their bottom line. So it's really that triple bottom line approach that goes into these decisions. I've lived in communities that have told Amazon to go packing, and I've worked with communities that have declining block rates for commercial customers because they're less peaky, and that's a whole wonky other conversation. But we really meet our customers where we find them and help them get to a better place. These are just really what we call in the public administration area sort of wicked problems. But communities have to rely on their values and what the data is telling them to get to the best decision. I know that's a flaky answer.
If I could just add, you know, if a community wants to, you know, engage in that industrial development issue, they should probably be putting tax dollars toward it, not ratepayer dollars. And then, and even then, you've got the literature on sort of the race to the bottom, right, where all these communities are you know, putting money towards things that may not necessarily have that payout. So it's an important thing for cities to think about.
Susan?
Yeah. Here in Philadelphia, one way that we try to encourage green growth is through our Green Cities Clean Waters program. We work with developers of commercial properties for them to institute stormwater management systems. We provide them with grants in order to develop their site to handle their stormwater so it doesn't add too much or add any stormwater to our overly burdened system. And so by doing that, we try to encourage smart development. And the program is also open to existing developments who can retrofit. We're always looking for ways to help businesses, because not only will it help them with our local utility costs, but most of the time they can also get state and federal discounts on other taxes for doing this kind of green infrastructure.
Susan, with the concrete examples, that's great. Zach?
We do a lot of work on stormwater as well. I think it's a really neat area where there's some really creative solutions and sort of that nexus of protecting supply, reducing loading on the environment, also ensuring that development pays their fair share for the impacts that they have on the environment. I think sometimes people are really focused on the jobs they create, but not as focused on the costs that they bring to a community. And so I think all the innovation that's happening in the stormwater area is really exciting to sort of balance out that kind of, again, triple bottom line policies that are good for the community. Not a lot to add there for now, but some communities I've seen have a commercially focused stormwater program. Others are also, considering a per parcel charge for everybody. So it's a whole other world of complexity there, but I'm glad we're having this conversation about the water sector instead of, just drinking water. It's all three.
All right. I think that's about time for the Q&A. Unless, Justin, you want to give us more time. Okay, we're good. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This was a great conversation. We touched on a lot of topics, and I'm very grateful that you all provided your perspectives here.
Thank you.
And I'll give it up to Justin now.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Really, thank you so much, Cecilia, all the panelists. That was a super great, engaging, interesting conversation. We heard as much in the chat. There were a lot of questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, though. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat. If anybody would like to be connected with any of the panelists, email me, and I'm happy to help with that. But thanks so much. That was great. We're going to move on to the next thing now. Paul, you can start trying to share your screen. Next up is Paul May, and he's going to tell you about a new opportunity from the Illinois Section American Water Works Association. Paul.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? And are you able to see the screen?
You're perfect.
Oh, I can't believe it. So, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I was not informed that there were going to be water puns, but I will share one if I can, which I'm a water engineer. And the question is, what is a water engineer's least favorite vegetable? And the answer, of course, is leaks. Nutritious, perhaps, but alarming always. That makes my daughter's eyes roll around and groan, but I shared it with you nonetheless. It's the best I've got. But today I'm here as a trustee of the American Water Works Association Illinois District, and representing Cook County. And it was a pleasure to see so many participants from Cook County and on the surface water system, because I think this program will be relevant to you. What we're looking to do here is to create an engagement tool for municipalities and utilities to reach out to their elected officials and consumers to provide greater education, which I think will bolster a lot of the things that were discussed today. So I'm going to move very quickly through this program, and the Water Ambassador program is loosely linked or built upon the Tree City USA program, which some of you that are from municipalities might be aware of. The Tree City USA program was built to educate consumers or citizens about the values of the urban forest. It's a very simple program which requires the municipalities to engage their citizens, provide education, and reach out to their elected officials. All things which we thought were missing or at least could be enhanced in the water industry to deal with all these conundrums and wicked challenges that were mentioned during the presentations today. So the program is intended to be very easy. It's intended to be constructed in a way which magnifies the voice of utilities across different platforms, so that the message that should be shared is received across a larger audience and is consistent across our industry. So there are four standards that are required in this program. And again, the objective is to utilize existing platforms to spread information and accurate information and relevant information for our communities in Illinois. And so the ways in which we have identified to do this is to utilize bill inserts for those who use paper billing, which I believe is probably most of us. Also to use social media platforms to reach out with information to consumers that might be in our town or not, but could certainly be relevant receivers of additional information, website postings, information to the village boards and village councils and so forth. And so the AWWA will provide content. Again, we're trying to do this in a way that makes it as easy as possible for our participants to utilize information and also to make it consistent across the industry. So over the course of a calendar year, we would expect that there would be one way to reach out to the consumers each month, and that information will be provided by ASAWWA and is available to be downloaded from our website. So again, very, very little work on behalf of the participants, but hopefully it will be very effective in communicating what has often been an out of sight, out of mind type of condition, and that's the water infrastructure and consumer information that could be relevant for them lowering their bill, like consumption, reducing consumption with low flow fixtures and reducing irrigation and such. And so the first standard, again, there's four standards. You can see them on the right here. The yellow box is around elected official education, which we think is very important. As Justin mentioned in the beginning, most elected officials do not come into their role with a lot of information or knowledge about the water system. And we see an opportunity to provide additional information to them so that they're able to make informed decisions. One of those ways, and I think perhaps the best way, is to use the Drinking Water 123 document that was produced by MPC. It's a brilliant device. It's very concise, but also informative and written to be received by lay people. And so that's a document that could be put in a welcome basket to newly elected officials every election cycle. Also, the participants could satisfy this standard by providing a tour of the water plant so that the elected officials actually get to see and put their hands on the pipes and pumps that serve water to their towns, or a presentation to the village board. And that would satisfy standard number one of the four. The second one is providing consumers education about the value of water. This is an important role. We had a lot of different discussions today about whether the price is too high and the price is too low or the price is just right. But it's important for the consumers to understand at least how the price is developed, what it compares to, and what it pays for. And that may be different whether your town has infrastructure that's 150 years old like Philadelphia, or you're a newer town that has newer infrastructure, or you have other issues that are relevant to your town like lead service replacement or a capital program which is necessary. And that helps communicate this information to the consumer to make them an engaged consumer rather than a consumer that is lacking information. Standard number three is industry understanding. So this might be answering questions that we all sometimes receive, like what's the difference between the drinking water system, wastewater system, and stormwater system? How are things funded? Why do I have to pay a bill for water and wastewater, but not for stormwater? Things like that might be relevant things that you could address during the consumer education category. And again, there will be documents and postings and images like the ones you see here before you today available on our website. So it's simply a matter of the participating groups grabbing it, giving it to the webmaster, posting it, or copying it into a bill stuffer. And the last standard we call wildcards, but really it's an opportunity to celebrate other things that exist. You'll use synergies that exist between other platforms and programs that already exist, like Earth Day. Maintaining the integrity of our natural resources is very important, especially for those of us who are on the surface water system, Lake Michigan surface water system that has an actual finite limit to what we can use. Very important things, and you might have other things that are relevant to your community that you might want to celebrate as well. And this gives an opportunity for participants to do that. I have the link here at the bottom in gold is ISAWWA. That's the Illinois section of the American Water Works Association and the Water Ambassador Program. So this program is going to start in July this year. It'll be an annual cycle. And so there will be a churn, new data, new information, new postings available each year for your participating communities to get information out to your citizens, your consumers, and your elected officials. So we hope that this is a new tool that will provide an instrument for all those that are on this presentation who are either consumers or providers or utilities to link up information and provide information from one party to the other. And that is all I have, Justin. Those who would like to see that again can go to that link or direct your staff, if you're with the municipality or a utility or an engineering consultant, to go to that website and you can sign up for additional information there. So thank you again very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Paul, thanks very much. And I like that in the presentation, it's intended to be easy, 4 times bulleted there. So that's great. I think this program is a really good idea and well thought out, with residents taking a more interest in their water due to affordability challenges like we talked about today, lead service line replacement. It's increasingly important that elected officials know more about the system. And I think that it's great that you're providing these resources for educating residents. So thanks for that. And we are going to share that link around again. And I'm going to share my screen right now. We're into the home stretch. Just a couple more slides here. All right. I mentioned that the 2-year cycle of this Drinking Water 123 Academy is repeating starting today. And once again, MPC is going to work with partners to offer technical assistance to Illinois communities. And the application opens right now. We're accepting applications. Our priority for this round is going to be water affordability and lead service line replacement. Applications are due October 28th, and you can get more information at that website, metroplanning.org/DW123TA. That stands for Drinking Water 123 Technical Assistance. If you have any questions about that program, please reach out, and we're happy to help you work through that and discuss potential projects. And finally, make sure to register for the other events in the series. So we'll see you back here July 15th to discuss lead service line replacement. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Thanks for all of our panelists and presenters, and we'll see you back again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.